Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to this session on improving understanding of SME exporters. My name's Eleanor Wragg, and I'm a senior reporter with GTR. Joining me today is Alice Wagner, Managing Director of Strategy, Economics, and Business Development at the British Business Bank. Alice, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you for coming. Now, Alice, the British Business Bank is tasked with ensuring that financial markets work better for smaller businesses across the UK. And to that end, you've recently conducted some research on SME exporting trends around finance and trade. Can you give us a bit of background around that? Sort of what led you to do the report and what have been the key findings?
Of course. So the British Business Bank basically looks after all forms of access to finance issues for SMEs in the UK.
Mhm.
Now, we have been working very closely with our colleagues at UKEF, at BAYS, and at the Department of International Trade about this intersection between SMEs and exporting, because it's been a perennial issue about how SMEs make up call it like a third of exporting, but of course how can you drive that number up? And we thought, because my team has quite a lot of analytical capability within it, that it would be useful to do a comprehensive survey of how SMEs think about exporting and how they think about finance specifically, with regards to exporting. And so, and to basically, I'll join in together to get a combined view as to what the behaviors are, so that we can actually serve the customer better, not to put too fine a point. Like, we wanted to understand, what do SMEs want and how do they think about finance when they are exporting, so that we can help craft interventions that are better. We worked very closely with Vivid Economics and Coriolis as our partners on the private sector side to do this, to ensure that's all statistically very significant and well done and rigorous. And we've released the information into the public through our research, because we wanted to provide basically the data so that we all have the same truth, right?
Yeah.
So that in this sector we can all go, right, that's the truth, and now we can have a better conversation about how to help sort of SMEs think about financing their exports.
Fantastic. And I mean, talking about those truths that we all hold, as being the case, I think a lot of the narrative has always tended to be that, there's this large pool of SME exporters and they're just constrained by limited access to finance. And from what I saw in the report, it seemed that that may not be the case. And that, for some, the reason they don't export is that they simply don't want to. So, from your viewpoint, what did you see in the data? Why are the UK's SMEs so reticent to internationalize? Is there any way that they can be encouraged to do so?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. So let's take a couple steps back. So
Yeah,
we started with, are exporters made or are they born?
right.
Okay. And the truth is that about a third of them are born that way. Like when they're founded, like say they're a software company, and it's like, well, duh, of course you can sell your software anywhere in the world. Okay. Another third of them are made, in the sense that they're born, and then at some later stage they go, yes, like I will sort of go into it. I'm going to plan. I'm going to decide to export, and then actually a big 30-40% basically fall into it accidentally, right?
Right.
Like they have a website, they're selling stuff, and one day somebody comes onto their website from a different country, and boom, suddenly they're an exporter because they've just shipped their first sale to a different country. And that's really important. So when you talk about why do I, how do I get SMEs to export, 2/3 of the SMEs didn't think about it. Like they either were born that way or it accidentally happened. And so then you're talking about what about the ones that don't export? The top reason is because they want to concentrate on the UK market. So that the
Mm,
limiting factor is not money for an entrepreneur, it's bandwidth. Yeah. They're
right.
so busy trying to build a business here. They're like, why would I, bother with that? I have loads of opportunity that I'm not tapping here in the UK. I don't want to. Or, they're in a sector, like if you're a hairdresser, or you run a pet sitting service. Yeah, those are not typically services that you can export. I mean, not everyone can be Vidal Sassoon and sort of, export sort of hair products and, be a hairdresser like that. But, in general, like we think about 40% of people who don't SMEs don't export go, I don't want to. I want to focus on my UK opportunities. Another 32% basically go, my goods and services just are inappropriate for it. And then another 10% goes, I don't need to go internationally. I have all of the growth potential I want here. So a lot of it's not access to finance. It's not like you have it's neither access to finance or anything else really. It's just people go, I prefer not to.
Yep. That makes sense. And then of those SMEs that sort of, you included in this research, of the ones that are exporting, they're out there selling their goods in different markets. What have been the findings that you got from them in terms of the challenges that they're seeing around, be that finance, be that, getting into markets and so on? What are the sort of the headliners there?
So the thing that we find is that money is not the top problem, right? The top problem is getting a customer, actually,
Yeah.
right? Because oh, that's the other thing. People who export don't keep on exporting. That's one of the really
Mm,
interesting things that we found with our research because we used existing like previous responses where people had said yes, I export. We called them up again and go, hey, assuming that they were still exporting, and it's not. Like a fairly substantial amount of people who were exporting a year ago, when we called them up a year later, weren't exporting anymore.
wow.
Because if you accidentally fall into exporting, you can accidentally fall out as well.
Yeah.
And so actually the top problem is, finding customers. And so, getting the networks and sort of landing the deals, landing the transactions. Second, of course, you have the paperwork and the bureaucracy around
Yeah.
sort of the tax requirements, customs, and how to do all of that, um, and making sure that the characteristics of your goods or services comply with what's needed in a different market, both in terms of tastes and sort of legalities. And then you start thinking about sort of in talent, and then do you have the capacity to be able to do it, and then you get to finance. So finance is like number 4 or number 5 on the list once you figured out sort of that you've got a contract, you've got a customer, you know how to serve it without getting into tax troubles. And then you go, ooh, and maybe I need some finance.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And that kind of leads me to, another part of your remit at the British Business Bank is that kind of advisory, right? Providing advice to small businesses. And, I've interviewed several SMEs for various articles that I've done, and often they've literally said to me, I don't know where to go to help, or, I
Yeah.
do know where the help is, but it's too difficult to access it. What are you guys doing to address this? What sort of initiatives
Okay,
do you have
so
underway?
I'm gonna give you a website. Okay, go to Google and type in British Business Bank Finance Hub. I just did it just to double check this, and then click. It's the first thing that comes up and click through. So we offer a online finance hub,
Right.
which depending, there's a little sort of tool. So you go through
Yeah.
and talk about who you are, and it will tell you sort of what kind of finance might be appropriate for you. We can't
Right.
necessarily go all the way through to recommending specific sort of sources of capital, but
Yeah.
once you know the type of capital or type of money that you need, then that can help. I mean, the other thing I would say is, I mean, we know this area is so complicated. I mean,
Mhm.
I work in it and I find it sort of, it's really difficult to, there isn't actually a signposting service really that truly works. I mean, one of the other resources that I'd say from a government point of view is, you've got growth hubs. So if you Google growth hub, you'll
Yeah.
find your local area growth hub, and sometimes there'll be face-to-face people, and it's free, and you can sort of go in and talk to it. The other possibility is if you have an accountant, or a broker, you can sometimes use those as well. But even the accounts and they might not show you sort of everything, that you might like. But essentially, you do want to get some advice, and
Yeah.
it's a lot harder than it really should be, and we know that. I mean, it probably doesn't help that my research also shows that the average SME figures out they need finance about a week or 2 weeks before they actually need the cash, which
Right.
probably doesn't help in terms of if you wait until the last minute. But we know, which is human, we know people do it. Then it's a lot more stressful to then try and navigate the system. So
Exactly.
yeah, but that's fact. That's just that's normal. We don't expect people to change, but we know that that's also part of the problem when the people go, it's too hard to find. It's like, yeah, and if you're under time pressure, it doesn't make it any easier. So
Absolutely. No, that makes sense. And then, this research document that you did, obviously it was published in February, and there's been the tiny kind of pandemic that's happened since then.
Yes.
So I figure a lot of things may have changed in terms of, the problems that exporters are coming up against. I mean, we've seen, in all of the articles that GTR has put out, various warnings from the ICC, from the WTO, talking about, the fact that trade, the numbers are going to be an awful lot lower than they were last year, and SME exports in particular are some of the hardest hit. Have you done any further research since this February report? And, what are the preliminary findings that you have?
Yeah, so now we operate a rolling schedule of research. So, for example, we did research during COVID about entrepreneurial diversity, where we asked about sort of COVID
Hmm.
impacts. That was sort of April through June. We've talked to angel investors at the sort of the higher end. We're currently in field for our annual survey, and we've been asking about COVID sort of throughout. This is all unpublished, but you'd be surprised at how resilient the sector is. I mean, although mind you, I mean, with the second localized lockdown, like everything's sort of live right now,
Mm,
so it's hard to sort of predict where it's going to go. But there's actually quite a lot of resilience in the SME sector. I mean, I think 60% of SMEs don't think they have to change their business model. A lot of them are, don't think that access to finance is that much of a problem, and they don't need to make sort of massive changes to their businesses. But I mean, equally, there's a substantial minority which do. So somewhere between 20 and 40%, and this varies obviously tremendously by sector. If you're in
yeah,
the hospitality sector, pretty much you are massively impacted by COVID. If you manufacture cheese, slightly less so, right? So I mean, as long as you can do socially distanced sort of production.
yeah,
And in terms of SME exporting, I think the concern is that we are probably in a global recession as we speak,
yeah,
right? That's been triggered by a lot of the COVID sort of responses globally. And
yeah,
so, exports will tend to fall I mean, trade as global sort of economic activity goes down. And what I just said about how it's really easy to stop, to lose a customer and then therefore stop exporting. We do think that is one of the things that is happening, particularly as larger buyers are shrinking down their supplier base, to make it simpler and lower cost, right? So
exactly.
so we are hearing that basically people are sticking to people that they know, and they're cutting sort of the edges down, and that unfortunately means that some of our SME exporters are on those margins, and sort of more likely to be let go, but not necessarily. I mean, there's still growth opportunities out there. I mean, what I would say is that certain sectors have done better. You
Yeah.
know, um, I think if you did, for example, puzzles, like I think sales of puzzles has gone through the roof, right? Um, you know, agriculture, educational technology. If you're ed tech, if you're
Yeah.
delivering Zoom, which we're using right now, right? I mean, there are winners, and some of those winning sectors are also sort of SMEs, and they are also exporting. So it really the average hides a lot of variability. Does that make
Yeah.
sense? And so you can't say overall that not everyone has the same experience, I guess is what I'm saying.
Exactly. No, and
Yeah.
that leads me really nicely to another question that I had to you about, the average not being everyone's experience and the fact that there has been this cutting away at the edges. We've seen also that the pandemic's exacerbated inequalities, right,
Yeah.
globally. And more specifically in trade, there's this growing body of research that is showing that women and minority owned businesses are now exporting less or, shutting down entirely, finding it harder to get the finance that they need. What can be done to support them, and where are the main barriers? I know that you've recently done some research on this. So, from the UK perspective, what's going on?
Yeah, so part of the problem is that you have to remember that most SMEs don't have external finance.
Right.
Okay, most people have a debt aversion, so lots of people, more than half, are sort of what we call permanent non-borrowers, right?
Yeah.
And the way they basically create growth is they bootstrap. They use their own profitability to do that. Now, what we know is that companies, what we've found out through our research, which was published sort of as we're speaking because it's pre-recorded today, is that, female founded businesses and minority founded businesses tend to have lower profitability. That means they need more absolute access to finance,
Yeah.
right? So all else being equal, it's not just that you're not getting it, it's that you need it more because you haven't got the underlying profitability, right? And then part of that is sector driven, sort of being in more competitive sectors, but part of it is there is a residual once we control for everything that
Yeah.
can't be explained by any of the factors that we have in our econometric models, and so therefore is structural. Yeah,
Yeah.
there is structural disadvantage, right? And um, so a, you need more finance, and then two, what we find is discouragement. So actually the actual underlying academic research sort of showed that you know uh, Black African, Black Caribbean, Bangladeshi, and Pakistani groups are more likely to have their loan applications rejected than Indian and white ones. Okay, but that
Wow.
these disparities are not due to racial discrimination per se. They're due to a bunch of loan outcomes that are correlated to factors which are probably due to underlying structural issues, like lack of collateral, poor credit worthiness, lack of formal savings, poor financial track records, and then above and all, sort of just people don't want to apply because they perceive they're going to be declined. So
Yeah.
some of that access to finance issue is a self-fulfilling prophecy because if you don't apply, your rejection rate is 100%,
Yeah.
right? Which is, and I'm not saying that it's the fault of the entrepreneur. I'm saying that the finance providers can't just sit back and go, I've got money, open door, come on in,
Yeah.
right? You have to actually go out, reach into the community if you really care about this, as opposed to just want to be seen to be caring, um, and actually engender trust because these communities don't trust you, right? They don't trust that if
Right.
they come in, they will be treated fairly and that they will be given a fair shake, right? And
Yeah.
so that is one of the things that you can do because a lot of we know that discouragement is like four times. There's four times as much sort of Black entrepreneurs are discouraged from applying for finance than
Wow.
white ones, right? I mean, it's just mind-boggling. And so, if they're not coming in your door,
Yeah.
you know, you you have, Muhammad has to go to the mountain, right?
Right.
Like not like just, oh, well, my door's open. It's like, well, what are you doing to, make it not so scary for people to come in? What are
Yeah.
you doing to make it so that when they do come in, you help them to get to a yes rather than just going, computer says no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Um,
think
uh,
that's really interesting because it also speaks to that kind of mismatch, right, between what financiers may be offering and what SME exporters may need. And that's something that I've seen that you've brought up in various research documents that you've put out over recent months. And given all of that, what, in your view, does the trade finance community need to understand about the UK's SME exporters? What are the gaps that exist in their approach to supporting them?
okay. So if I had to get one message across, it's this: from an SME's perspective, money is money. Okay.
Right.
So simple is better. And quite frankly, a bog standard working capital, an overdraft, will do them for most of their exporting requirements, right? By the way, we also found that most of the need for finance is actually pre-contract, not post-contract.
Okay.
So, all of I think the trade finance sector, God bless, and I'm an ex-banker too, okay? You start from a product-centric, view where you take a Rolls Royce, that you've created for, well, frankly, Rolls Royce,
Yeah.
of a product, and then you quote, stum it down, okay, and that doesn't work for SMEs. They need actually something not bespoke, but the opposite of bespoke, a simple, standardized product that's just money, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, so we currently do the CBILS, the coronavirus business interruption loans. Those are
Yeah.
allowed to support exports.
Yeah.
Yeah, those loans are. And so it might be easier and faster and more advantageous for your SME exporting sort of clients to just use one of those general forms of finance that are easy for them it comes in working capital sort of
Yeah.
as well as term loan um, flavors to just do that rather than to take a sort of more bespoke specialist trade finance because the SMEs probably don't understand it, which results in mis-selling risk.
Right.
But more importantly, they it may not add value. Now, I do draw the line at insurance. Like trade insurance is a whole nother ball of wax, and that does add value, right? That's not
Yeah.
money, that's risk sort of mitigation. And that again, it's like, you need to try and need to understand that SMEs are basically retail customers. They need something that's
Yeah.
simple, like dead simple, right? um, and not necessarily something that you've designed for a specialist large corporate, but take a step back and go, if I was designing the most simple product, what would it be? What do people need? So our research is here to try and help, give the data to help the industry try and meet the needs of the customer sort of better,
Yeah.
because they are, I mean, they want the finance, they see the value, but they just, you know they're really busy people. Money is not the most important thing to them.
Yeah.
It really isn't. They're more, they just, it's just a means to an end to get their sales for the company. And so you can't expect them to spend huge amounts of time trying to master the intricacies of your of your product.
Absolutely. Just on that, I mean, you mentioned sort of the Sybils and various other things that obviously the British Business Bank is working with commercial banks to get this support out to SME exporters. Now, obviously, everyone's working from home. Bank staff are working from home as well. This must have been incredibly challenging. It's sort of, fixing the plane while it's in flight, right?
While it's falling.
Yeah,
Sorry.
while it's falling from the sky. Um, what's the experience been like, in terms of sort of the British Business Bank pulling together with the banks and trying to get all this stuff out to the SMEs?
I think, just from a personal story perspective, I worked every single day in May, Saturdays,
Wow.
Sundays. And when I say I work, minimum 10 hours a day, every day, just
Oh my
trying to
goodness.
get something. And me and like loads of my colleagues too. I mean, the number of 8 p.m. Saturday night phone calls, with like
Wow.
40 people. And the 40 people included people from the banks, from all of the major banks, right? In fact, some of whom I know and some of who I don't. And I have to say that the financial services sector of the UK was incredibly committed in trying to find solutions that would help the UK SMEs. Yeah. I mean, this is not to say that we always agreed on everything, but
Yeah.
they showed up, they were there, they're delivering, and that, you know, I'm not. I mean, I think that needs to be said to say thank you. There's an incredible amount of dedication that people do care about supporting this country and the entrepreneurs that create like so many of the jobs that are here. It has been intense, and we're not out of it yet, right? We're still, as we speak, we're in the middle of the second lockdown. Nobody really knows where the economy is going.
Yeah.
But what's likely, because is that we are in some sort of global recession. It's kind of weird because it's this dip thing,
Yeah.
but I think economic activity is not at the level it was previously, and that means trade is probably going to be down because trade is a derivative of global economic activity,
Yeah.
right? I mean, for large and small, you know and I think that's something where we need to think about it, because so we've been very very keen that the interventions that we do incorporate sort of do support exporters as well as everybody else. Yeah. And so
Absolutely.
so we haven't forgotten about exports, but from our point of view and from government's point of well from our point of view and from an SME's point of view, see, exporting is just another form of growth. It's just a
Yeah.
customer. Yeah, growth is growth. Like money is money, and growth is growth, regardless if it comes from domestic or internationally. It's just maybe the international one requires a little bit more fiddling to make it sort of make that sale, right? But all else being equal, like exports aren't endowed with some sort of special halo.
Yeah.
Like a company will take a sale where it can get it.
Yeah. Exactly. I think that's a really good kind of pull quote for this session. Um, this has been a really informative session. So thank you so much, Alice. Just before we sort of wrap up, I just wanted to get from you what are your priorities sort of over the coming months? I assume that you've got an awful lot on. Hopefully, you're not working sort of around the clock every single day this month. But what are the priorities of the British Business Bank? Where are the key areas of focus? Where are SMEs, needing a bit more support at the moment?
Yeah, no, well, you have to remember the British Business Bank is 100% owned by the UK government. So all of our
Yeah,
capital comes from the UK government. And so therefore we align very much to government's goals.
yeah,
And at the moment, we are absolutely focused on ensuring to minimize sort of long-term economic sort of damage from the situation that we're finding ourselves in with the global pandemic. You know, so that is A1 number one job. Beyond that, though, we do want to build better, because focus on the recovery, and so that does mean um, trying to address inequalities. I mean not just the inequalities between sort of female founders and those that are male, and sort of ethnic disparities, but also place, right? Because we know exporters from outside London and the southeast versus further abroad. We want to address that, and regional development and opportunity. We also are very supportive of the science and R&D agenda within this country as well, because that supports productivity. So exporters are really great because exporters are by definition super competitive
Mhm.
internationally, and so they're highly productive. So some of our most sort of research and most productive sort of SMEs are the ones that come out of the science based here, who are
Yeah.
truly world class. And so that's really important to us as well. So it's really about we're focusing on the current sort of situation, but also we have an eye on sort of the recovery, and I can't, of course, forget about net zero and climate change as well,
Yeah.
sort of to help people sort of, if you need to invest in your company to rejig it, you should rejig it in a way that that sort of allows you to be supporting net zero. I think from an export perspective as well, that's got a lot of potential because climate change affects all of us, and there's
Yeah.
going to be a huge amount of demand, I think, for technologies, for example, that are associated with that. And so we need to be set up to be able to support that in the long run. So those are some of the things that are important to this government, and therefore important to ourselves as well as we look forward.
Great. Thank you very much. That all sounds really interesting. And thank you again for joining us in this session.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Eleanor.